Hey everyone, this is Jack from the Cardboard Herald, and today we are taking a look at Skulk Hollow by Pencil First Games. So what is this game? This is a two-player head-to-head asymmetric dueler in which one player is taking on the role of the heroic Foxen army, trying to defend their land from the Guardians, the big, stompy, elemental representations of the land itself, trying to kick out these inhabitants that have taken over this sacred grounds called Skulk Hollow. And yes, I said it's asymmetric in that the Foxen player has a very different modus operandi than the Guardian player. There are separate victory conditions based off of which Guardian the Guardian player is playing, and there are separate Foxen heroes, the sort of captain that is your personal representation on the board that gives the Foxen player a little special power. It's not nearly as defining as what Guardian is in play, but still adds quite a bit of variety. Now, the basic flow of the game is that players going to take actions driven by the cards that they have in their hand. Each of the Guardians has their own unique set of cards that correspond to that Guardian set of actions. And then the Foxen player has just one deck, but they're going to be able to populate the board with more and more little tiny squishy glass cannon Foxen meeples that you are going to hopefully be able to either pelt the Guardian with ranged attacks, or better yet, like in the Shadows of Colossus video game, you send your little foxes to climb up onto the Guardians themselves and attack various locations that if you successfully disable a location by dealing enough damage, you are preventing certain actions being taken by that Guardian themselves. And if you deal enough damage that you've covered all of the health spaces on the Guardian, then you win the game. If your Foxen leader gets smushed and they run out of health, well, then you lose the game. It's a good thing that the Foxen hero meeple cannot be affected by the Guardians if it cohabitates a space with other Foxens. It's good to be king. So what makes it cool? Well, first off, normally I don't start with theme in discussing the highlights of a game, but this is so incredibly thematic. It is so lovely to see the little Foxens climb up this insurmountable Guardian represented by the Guardian board, unique to each of the Guardian meeples. And then the wooden pieces are so awesome. The Guardians are big and stompy and moving about the board. The tentacle squid one has all his like little cool tentacles coming up. The artwork is really charming. The Guardians look really ferocious, and the mechanics reverberate that thematic immersion so well. Like, everything that you're doing is in facilitation of this great cinematic story that's unfolding in front of you. Second, I really like the Guardian asymmetry. Each of the Guardians has their own unique powers and also victory conditions, and this adds a lot of replayability to the game. You have the really basic bear who just wants to eat tons of little Foxens, which is helpful that they're like popcorn, in that most of them are glass cannons with 1 or 2 health, just chasing them around the board and gobbling them up. And then you have more complex ones like the eagle, who wants to make sure there are no Foxen underlings on the ground spaces. Not only does that create interesting tactical decisions for the Guardian player, but also it creates cool decisions for the Foxen player. You don't want to send up all your units onto the Guardian, which is in general the more protective space, if that's going to dwindle your forces that are on the ground spaces on the board, making you more vulnerable to immediate victory by the Guardian. And then there's one that has a sort of digging mechanic that feels a bit capture the flag-ish, and then there's also one who wants to get all his little tentacles up onto the board. It just gives a bit of variety and a little bit more thematic and mechanical distinction from game to game to game. I also like, for the simplicity of the game, which it is overall pretty simple, and I'll get into that in a little bit, there are lots of tactical decisions that you're going to have to make, both as the Foxen and as the Guardian player, that are based off of not only what your current capabilities are, but what you want to line up for future turns. This is especially represented in the power cubes that you can allocate. the Foxen player and some of the Guardians can generate these power cubes that allow you to take free bonus actions on future turns, but you have to commit actions from current turns in order to create them and allocate them to specific Foxes. But that's the only way that you're going to be able to take more than your limited action number that is typically 3 for the Foxen or 2 for the Guardians, but they make for really substantial turns, and so it gives some risk, reward, some interesting decisions that you can make. I also like that the Foxes have different roles on the different underling units, and so a card that gives a ranged attack can have a different meaning depending on which Foxen is resolving it. Archers can be in a ground space just surrounding the Guardians, whereas the Sentinel needs to be within the space themselves. But on the other hand, the Sentinel has more health and can also participate in melee attacks. As far as what didn't really work for me, well, one, after playing with the Guardians some, it did feel like a little bit of a letdown that the Foxen player doesn't have the same kind of variety and flavor that the Guardians do, because the Guardians are the ones that define their asymmetric conditions, and then the Foxen hero changing just kind of gives you a slightly different power. That said, the change of the Guardian does affect how you as the Fox player approach the game and certainly try to run interference against them, but I would have liked to see more variety and flavor and control on the part of the Foxes, either through more interesting change-ups between the Fox hero, or that the Fox hero integrated certain new units into their deck, giving a different capability. Also, the game does have lots of tactical decisions, but it doesn't really feel like there's a lot of long-term strategic decisions. Ultimately, you're going to be reacting to the cards that you have in your hand, which is great for simplicity, but because your actions are defined by those cards, and those cards are drawn from a randomized deck, you're not really going to be able to account on what you'll be able to do 2, 3, or 4 turns from now. So you don't really get to chain things in sequence outside of feeling like investing in the power cubes or not. So lots of tactical decisions, which creates some immediacy, but there's a lot of luck that interferes with overall strategy, which makes the game feel more simplistic. The flip side of that is that it is more approachable for younger players, and my 6-year-old is certainly able to play on a team. The box says 8 and up, which I think is just about accurate, so I do like the approachability, but as someone who is absolutely in love with this theme and with the premise of the game, I would have liked a little bit more depth and complexity. But overall, I like this game. This is a nice, approachable head-to-head game where it's so cinematic that I think people are going to be invested in it, to the point that even if you don't like head-to-head games, this may still be worth a try, because even on the losing end, it's so cool to see things unfold. And as much as I do wish that there was more depth and more strategic capability and maybe a little bit more dynamic variety in some situations of the game, the simplicity and approachability does work in its favor, especially for the audience that it's going for. And that's our review. Thank you so much for watching. I've been Jack for the Cardboard Herald. If you enjoyed this video, we have all kinds of other reviews, interviews, and recommendations via writing, podcasts, and video here on our channel and website cardboardherald.com. Our content is audience supported, so if you want to show your support, please visit our Patreon. Thank you so much for watching. This has been the Cardboard Herald.